So we've all heard this, classic marketing advice, almost cliche, show, don't tell, right? And especially in B2B, we tend to do a lot more telling, a lot less showing. We rely on words, on persuasion, right? And it kind of makes sense because in B2B, we tend to sell software or services, which is very intangible. While if you're selling sneakers, it's easier to visualize the value of your product, right? And if you've been following me, you know probably that I'm all about mental availability and making sure that your brand stays top of mind. And visual creativity is really something that plays a huge role in building memory structures and having this recall when the buying moment happens so that your brand stays top of mind. So naturally, I'm really interested in this topic, and that's why I invited Mary to unpack this. When I saw her viral post about this topic, I think I got like over 1,000 likes or something. I thought, okay, yes, this is my people. I need to talk to her. So yeah, meet Mary Keough. I practice Mary Keough. She's the director of product and content marketing at CoLab Software. And yeah, today we'll be diving into why visual creative matters in B2B and how to get it right and how to use it to make your brand memorable, especially in B2B. So Mary, my first question to you is, like we already said, most B2B companies, they see designs as aesthetics, like as decoration. They don't really they don't really put much thinking into this, but you see it as almost a strategic differentiator. So what was the moment that you realized this shift? What made you think that?
Yeah, so it started back in last May. We did a more intentional, I would call it I guess you would call it a rebrand, but it wasn't like a rebrand in the traditional sense. But we really just started looking at the way we were talking about and showing our product and showing high level messaging. So any infographics we would use, we were doing a lot of survey reports. All of those visuals started to look a little bit different than each other. So we said, you know what, we got to tighten this up. We should really make sure everything that we use across every channel looks similar. It doesn't have to look exactly the same, but it has to use the same colors, use the same fonts, and it should have the same visual stylings, which wasn't necessarily happening. And that was especially true in our demand gen campaigns. So we advertise mainly on LinkedIn. And when we did this ads audit, we found we were just all over the place with our ads because we were just testing so much. We wanted to see what was resonating with the audience, what messaging was resonating, what creative was resonating. So we took a big pause and we said, okay, let's divide this up into themes. So once we did the rebrand, we had our new colors, new visual stylings, new fonts that we were used that could be approved across all our assets. We said, what are the themes? What are we seeing in all of these ads? So it's hilarious. We just did screenshots. I think we had over 1,000 ads. And we were just we just started pulling them into little buckets. What does this look like? What are we trying to do with these? And we found that each bucket that got the highest engagement and the highest amount of clicks or conversions, just depending on what campaign objective we were running, fell into just 5 buckets. And once we started saying for XYZ campaign, so if we're doing brand awareness, website visits, conversions, these are the only buckets we are going to start pulling from for ads. And we're just that was our hypothesis we worked from. So if we have a brand awareness ad campaign that we're running, we are only going to run these type of ads in the brand awareness campaign. And we just wanted to see if it would work, and it did. So it was just very cool to see us take that step back and say, what are we really what is happening with our audience? What's working and what's not? Double down on that and then see it pay dividends. So that was one piece where I was okay, something is working here where creative is actually the differentiator. We're not changing what we say because our messaging is very tight. MJ Smith is the CMO here, and she kind of owns messaging. So messaging didn't change. The only thing that changed was the visual creative. And that was the moment when I was something's big here.
Love it. So you said that there were only 5 buckets. What were these buckets? How did you find out these themes?
Yep. So the themes that we found were were number one, marketing UI is what I would call it. So our visual UI is broad, there's there's a lot of nuances in it. So it's really hard to just take a screenshot of our UI and expect someone to understand what is going on. So instead, what we would do is use marketing UI. So we would take just a small piece of the product and exaggerate it in some way. So I'll use a really specific example. We have CAD. So we work with CAD. It's a CAD viewer. and we have people coming into the CAD viewer and you add comments on the CAD. Now, in our marketing UI, we would have heads, like real people's faces, because people connect with people. That actually doesn't happen in the product at all. You don't see people's heads floating around the CAD, but we wanted to emphasize that our tool is a collaborative tool where a lot of people come in. So marketing UI was one.
Sorry to interrupt here, but I'm so happy that you mentioned this, and this makes so much sense now. What was it? Marketing UI. This resonates with me because I actually did exactly this thing for my mind reader workshop. When I was creating my landing page, I was looking for ways to visualize what happens in that workshop. And like naturally your head goes to, like, how do you visualize this? There is like not much really happening from a visual point of view. It's more a lot of interacting, a lot of light bulb moments. And then I started thinking like, how would I visualize the outcomes? If I had to draw it, what would it be, right? And then I created these sections that, like you're saying, like it's not exactly something that happens during the workshop, but what I do use during the workshop is Figma. I use Figma, I visualize things, and they're messy, they're ugly, but they do that. So I did like exaggerated, pretty version of that, so it's like, hey, this is how you're going to see your product, or this is how your team is going to interact, or this is how your insights are going to be visualized during the workshop. And when I submitted this for feedback to my community, everybody was like, could you please pull out that section higher? Because this is like, you could only leave that section and it will do the job. It will explain everything that happens there. So I really resonate with that. Okay, sorry. So that was the first bucket. Yeah. What's next?
So the second bucket was memes, hilariously. So any memes that we would use to describe, but it had to be specific. So this is really interesting. We were trying to use memes at all these different parts of the customer, what we would call the customer journey. And it really only worked at the problem aware stage. So it really only worked when we were talking about problems, because it makes sense, right? When you're looking at memes, they feel very relatable, but they're almost always talking about this problem that's very annoying. So we found that, yes, memes work, but only in this very specific subset of our campaigns. Then the next that we found that worked really well was infographics. But we spent like a lot of time digging into the types of infographics that were really resonating with our customers. And they, like, hilariously, we work with engineers, like mechanical engineers. They had to be very detailed. Total opposite advice of what you would receive like on LinkedIn, which is simplify everything, make it easy to understand. But our customers were really gravitating toward these very detailed infographics.
And so you did that. So you found this out through surveying, talking to them, or how did you find this out?
No, we found it out a little bit of surveys. Use Winter, WYNTER we did some creative testing in there, but we really just found it through testing different types of infographics. So some of them would be very simple, like a bar graph. And we found the ones that worked were like these really intense visuals that would like describe a process really specific to engineering. They just ate it up. They loved it. And then the other one, this is another funny one that's probably very specific to our audience, equations. So we would take an equation that an engineer would be really familiar with. So like a really good example is like force equals mass times acceleration. So F equals ma. And we would just like put little arrows and say, CoLab equals force, mass equals your design review process, and A equals the problems or something. And people would be like, oh, that's so awesome that you like did this with our engineering equations, because engineers see an equation and they're instantly like, I know this, like this is familiar to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, those were like the big buckets that we found were working really well. And when we doubled down on them, so kept testing only in those buckets and then only in the objectives, that's when we were seeing the best results. So that's when I was like, you know what? It's definitely our visual creative and being very intentional with our visual creative that's giving us so much success.
Yeah. And you really practice what you preach, at least like from what I've seen. I visited your website just before this event, and literally, even if you deleted all the text, I would still understand what this is about. It's so beautifully visualized. It's really impressive. So you saying in your viral post, you said that there are some weeks that what did you say? Where you spend more time analyzing, brainstorming, and briefing visual creative than you do on copy. So how does this process really look like? What exactly are you looking for? What makes a piece of creative effective in your eyes? How do you like from step by step? How does it work?
Yeah. So for demand gen campaigns, because that's where I spend the majority of my time, it's a lot of what's getting the most engagement. So what's getting high click-through rates, dwell times, engagement rate, reactions, like we're just kind of looking at all of that. I'll kind of visualize them again on a Figma board. So look at them all together and say, okay, what are we seeing here? And then once they hit an ad fatigue, so people are like, okay, I've seen this like 6 or 7 times, I'll say, okay, what's working really well is, let's say, the engineering equations. So then I'm saying, okay, cool, the engineering equation is working. Let's go find a new one. So during this time, I'm going out, I'm finding a new engineering equation, figuring out how it's going to work for our audience, seeing how we're going to like work collab messaging into it. So all of that process probably takes like a good half to a full day of just like what creative is working and how do we want to refresh it. And then I will send that brief to our graphic designer. So we have an internal graphic designer who's dedicated just to demand gen and social media. A good example, I know I keep talking about demand gen and campaigns. This also works. We do all of our CEO's graphics that he uses on LinkedIn. So if you guys go and follow Adam Keating at all, all the graphics that he does, we actually do that for him, which is pretty cool. And then the other graphics that we do fairly often are decks. So our CEO and executive team does a lot of talks, like talks at conferences, talks at trade shows. So we build all of the decks for them. So we do all of the graphic design in there. So all of that time, we are really taking like, how are we going to use the messaging? Because like I said, the messaging doesn't change. And that's the really beautiful thing about once you have like this really great messaging system that works, is all you're doing is thinking, how can I put this messaging into visuals, into a visual creative?
Okay, so the messaging comes from, I assume, the strategic level, right? And then you do kind of the messaging work, like, okay, how do I put it into a creative? So then you do like the concept, and then you translate that concept, or you brief the graphic designer or the creative team on that.
Yep, that's exactly right.
There was one thing that you said that intrigued me. So you said that you have a separate designer for demand gen campaigns. Yeah. Could you tell us more about that? What's the reason? How does that look like?
Yeah, so demand gen, so LinkedIn and ads are probably our main source of marketing pipeline. So it's a really big, important motion for us. So we have a dedicated graphic designer just for LinkedIn, just for social media, because it's such an important pipeline driver for us that we want them to be totally focused and available if we need any graphics there.
And I also kind of find like, for demand gen or for brand awareness campaigns, I feel like this is the audience that is not in market, or most of the audience is not in market, so they're not really actively thinking about a solution like yours. So we really like having this visual creative is super important, because that helps you sneak into their minds while they're not paying attention, right? So that is the best way to kind of to convey that message. And that, I feel like the message is also different there, right? So you're really communicating the value in a latent way. It's not like the explicit value of that you communicate on your website for people who are already interested in you. It's a completely different level of communicating, right? How do you see this difference between these two?
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, it's interesting that you put it that way too, because when we're thinking about it, we're a high ACV product. You know, I don't want to like beat around the bush, because someone who's like PLG, or you can buy their product with a credit card, this probably won't be as relevant, but you nailed it. So the brand awareness, we're doing these very high level representations of our highest level messaging. And what we're really doing is like building a lot of retargeting audiences, because we have a lot of people in our buying process. So our brand awareness campaigns are our largest audience, and then we kind of funnel them down from there. And then remarketing is really just that value prop kind of like going over and over and over again. So I love that you put that, because that's exactly what we do, is we kind of bucket creatives on levels of the buying journey.
Yeah, I love that. So wait, I had another question. I forgot about this. In the meantime, there is a question in the chat for you to share the link to your website. So while I'm trying to remember my question, could you please put the link to your website? Remember that one of the questions in under your post was about making a case internally for prioritizing visual storytelling, visual creativity. How was that for you? What was the process? Was it like immediately, yes, let's do it? Or was there a little bit of friction?
There was not a lot of friction, but I'll kind of explain. Our CEO is very passionate about marketing. He loves marketing. I won't say he like always like gets it. Like he's not going to understand like attribution reports in LinkedIn, and that's okay, you know, but he likes marketing and he's passionate about it. I think you couldn't ask for anything more than that. And then, like I said, I have someone above me in marketing, our CMO, MJ, also very passionate about messaging and making sure our messaging is always represented well in every channel that we're present in. So I think just honestly having a leadership team that already believes in it, it makes it much easier to make cases for specific types of creative. So specific example, our CEO wasn't super thrilled with memes. He felt like that wasn't a great representation of our brand. And what we explained was, hey, you know what? We are a different type of engineering tool, because he comes from like the CAD. We have this system in our engineering technology ecosystem called PLM. It's very like data driven. Like if you have a bearing, let's say, it will have every single product detail point of that bearing. So this is what engineers are involved in every day. They're involved in like CAD and like dimensions and material types. So like they're very focused in on like the digital product representation. But CoLab is a collaborative tool. You're working with people in CAD. And so what we explained is that's such a huge part of our messaging, is that we are people, human oriented. We are bringing people together during the engineering process. And one way to bring people together is memes. Like people like them. It gets them excited. They think that's very funny. So once we started digging into our CEO's issue with memes, he was like, okay, well, now that you explain it that way, I think some of our memes just are a little too surface level. I think we need to go deeper. And I was like, perfect. This is exactly the type of feedback I need. Let's talk together on how we can go deeper in our memes. Like what makes a meme more relevant for an engineer versus too surface level. And then once we started doing that, the memes got better. And if you go onto Adam's LinkedIn, like you'll see he even started sharing some of them. So really way that you can get people on board if you just dig into like know why you're doing what you're doing. So we knew exactly why we were doing memes, and then dig into the problems. Like now you explain to me, like now you know why we're doing memes. Now explain to me like why you had an issue with it. And then we can kind of solve the problem from there.
Yes, I love this. I get, of course, a lot of questions around how do you get buy-in for brand campaigns, for brand marketing, for the marketing waiting room sort of activities, right? And I always, my best advice is just get together, a group of people together with the CEO or the founder, and just go through the buyer's journey. Like pretend that you are the buyer and pretend that you see your marketing, like from day zero to the buying trigger and actually purchasing the product. Somehow this exercise, and it just literally takes 30 minutes or so, this flips perspectives, and you all of a sudden see what is the goal at each step. What do you have to put at each touch point and what goal you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to communicate. And all of a sudden that creates this common ground. And you don't need to convince somebody to, you don't need the buy-in. It just happens naturally because everybody understands what we're trying to achieve here.
Yeah,
I see
exactly.
there's a question. I see there's a question in the chat, and it's about your designer for LinkedIn. So for the demand gen.
Yeah.
Does he or she have specific approach?
Yeah, good question. So once I give that brief, like let's say we need a new campaign to run and it's going to be a website visits campaign. So kind of that middle ground campaign. I'll say, I want 5 to 10 ads. I want them to be in the following 3 categories. And then I want them to contain this messaging. So I'll be really specific with the messaging. I'm director of product and content, so I own the messaging part. It's filtered down from MJ. So I'll give her that brief. She'll go create 5 to 10 ads. I'll come in and say, yes, this is good. I think we should alter this. She'll do another rebrand and then we'll just ship it. So it's really just this kind of like very iterative process where it's like, here's what I want to see. They go and kind of take it and represent my concepts visually. I say what I like and don't like and what changes need to be made. Like maybe the engineering equation is perfect, but we just need like a shift in some of the words. Like she'll do that and then we'll ship them off.
That's interesting. So I'm curious, when you say like, I want it to look like this or that, what level are you speaking? Are you talking like literally, I would visualize it like this, or do you talk more on a more conceptual or like feelings-based level? I want this to convey this feeling, or I want this to convey this message. How does that work?
Yeah, so if it's a message, so I'll use a problem one. So a problem that our customers run into if they don't have CoLab is it's really difficult to share CAD. With CoLab, it's very easy to share CAD. You send them a link and they get to go into the CAD. So I'll say, I want a marketing UI that showcases the problem. It's difficult to get people into CAD. And she is amazing. We have my senior brand designer is just phenomenal. So she can take that concept and create 3 different representations of that message. And then I'll just say, here's what I like, here's what I don't like. And then we'll kind of go from there.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to need contact details to your designer to steal her from me. I think it's underestimated. It's so much. Back in my growth hacking era, when I was like really focused on performance and tweaking the numbers, visual creative was just kind of like a placeholder. You need to have something visual. So you just, tell the designer to visualize anything. You don't think about the messaging, you just drop it and you just tweak based on like, oh, maybe we should use this color over that color. And that's the level of depth that we were going into. But since I'm, working more on positioning and messaging, I see how much this visual part is. I really want to say I'm sorry to all my designer and creative colleagues that I used to work with. Like I really underestimated how important your job was. So yeah, that's really amazing what they can do. So my next question might be difficult, but I'm really curious to hear from you. How did you experience the change like before and after? So before you realized, before you defined these 5 buckets, before that moment and after, in terms of results, in terms of sales, in terms of brand awareness. Could you tell us more about that transformation?
Yeah. This is actually, it's a tough story too, because again, take my ACV into account. We're a 5 to 6 ACV product. So take that and run with it. So what we did in October was do these 5 buckets. And we said, this is how we're going to structure our ad campaigns from now on. We expect to see a dip in pipeline and opportunities created. We didn't know how long that dip would be. We saw a dip for probably 1.5 quarters, which is a long time for a venture-backed startup to see a dip in progress, because they always want to see things going up and to the right? So it was getting a little scary for our CEO. And I was like, you gotta trust me. Like, the engagement metrics are there. Everyone is liking our content. Like, it's really, really resonating. And we just finally started to see the results of that in pipeline numbers. And I think that's when he was finally like, oh, okay, I get why we were doing this now. This is like really working. So you just I would say my biggest piece of advice is know why you're doing it, know why this is an important thing for your company and your audience, and stick to that narrative no matter what, and know it's going to take some time.
Yeah. So were you the main person that was driving this change, or did you have like a committee? How did that look like?
No, it was just me. Yeah. So we had our demand gen person leave in September. So I took over that role, which is where my strengths lie. I was demand gen before that too. And MJ was like, do whatever you want with this. And I said, okay. I audited the account, audited the creative, and said, this is where I want to go. These are the results I expect to see. Don't know how long this is going to take, but I'm guessing it's going to take, at least 3 to 6 months. And it was definitely at the tail end of that 6 months, but we did see it. So I'm very happy with it.
Wow. It's really amazing. So at the moment, or from the moment that you kind of realized, okay, we need to be more visual, more consistent with our visual kind of language and messaging, did you already have like all the resources and what it took to put that into motion? Or did you have to like do some scrappy stuff before you invested in, you said like 30% of our marketing team is dedicated to graphic design, right? So
yeah.
How was that like from the get-go, or did you build that up? How did that look like for you?
No, it was from the get-go. So we were lucky that we already had that buy-in from leadership that we needed that much of our marketing team dedicated to just graphic design and visual creative. I will say though that we have added, starting at the beginning of this year, we hired a video agency to do some videos for us because we found that our audience really interacted well. We just created some like really crappy like looms, like just like walking through the product, but people loved it. They were like, this is great. This is fantastic. So we put a little bit of extra resources into some video production at the start of this year.
Amazing. Okay, well then you actually were lucky. Like having a CEO that loves marketing, understands the importance, that really takes you a long way. Okay, so maybe the last question before we go, because we're hitting the 30-minute mark. What was your favorite creative visual, video or static, that you really enjoyed and you were really proud to create and actually delivered results?
Yeah, I think the engineering equations, hilariously enough, if you go into LinkedIn ads library, you can probably see them if you look up CoLab Software. But I just felt like we just kind of thought of the idea. My graphic designer and I were in a brainstorm and we were just like, what is going to work for this audience? It was just something random, we decided, we kept iterating on it. We were like, okay, it's almost there. It's almost there. Yes, that's the one. So it took like 3 or 4 times before we were like, yes, we got the engineering equation. It works. It works for our messaging and it makes sense, because engineers can also be pretty ruthless if it doesn't make technical sense. So we were like, okay, that actually makes sense. So once we shipped that, seeing people respond to it, like they just loved it. They thought that was just like the coolest way to represent something that's very familiar to them, but for CoLab. So really, really interesting. Like I was just really proud of that one. And I loved also that it didn't necessarily have to show the product and people still understood what we were trying to say. And I think that's a really important thing for people to understand, because I think the default is always to just show them the product. Just show how it works. Give a screenshot, give a screen share, give a mini demo or whatever. But I think there's a lot to be said for taking your high-level messaging, your high-level concepts, and shifting them into something that's familiar for your audience.
Yeah. I think this process, that takes a bit of a different part of your brain to develop that.
Yes.
But for me, it's also very satisfying. So I feel you on this one.
I agree.
I know I promised you that was the last question, but I have one more.
Okay, no problem.
Is there any literature, any resources that you could reference us to that you find helpful or that helped you really develop that kind of muscle, visualizing the messaging?
Yeah, I think Winter has a really great messaging course, actually. Again, WYNTER. It's free. It's completely free messaging course. It takes you through everything from how to create a high-level strategic narrative all the way down to like how to talk about your product. And that was just like one of the most valuable things. I still can't believe it's free. It's crazy. I've gotten so much value out of it, and anyone can do it right now.
Never heard of this.
So yeah, I think that is one thing that I think marketers today underestimate, is just how much your messaging matters. Because our visual creative would be nothing if we didn't have messaging. Like I said, the only reason our visual creative is the differentiator it is today is because our messaging is so spot on.
Yeah, exactly. I feel you on this one. And I feel like all these questions, all the problems that we have around content in general. So things like, I'm about to brief my designer, or I'm about to brief my content creator. I don't know what to say. It feels like starting from scratch each and every time. That is because you haven't done this messaging work. But it's very difficult to do that work, to get buy-in for this. So you kind of always have to sneak that in, right? In your case, you're lucky you could really take the space for it. But yeah, most of us, we have to really do it in stealth mode.
Yeah, I think doing it in stealth mode is a really great way to do it, because then you can come to your CEO and be like, I already did this and it's working. So
exactly.
You have more resources.
Yes. Yes.
Another really great way, because like I have worked for CEOs who didn't love marketing as much as my current CEO does. And the way that I got their buy-in was, I was head of marketing for a small startup, and I was like, there is a reason you hired me. And the reason is this. This is part of me doing this. So if you don't believe in it, like we're kind of at an impasse. Like you hired me to do something, and now you're blocking me from doing the thing that you hired me to do. Like, yeah. It's really difficult, but you do have to have those tough conversations if you want to see those big results.
Yes, and it takes a whole lot of confidence.
Yes.
You're confident in your process, you're confident in what you're doing, this is the way, so you're just going to push for it. So yeah, well done.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so winter course, messaging course, was there anything else that you would like to mention in terms of resources?
Yeah, I loved, it's not necessarily for visual creative, but it'll get you thinking in that vein, I always reference this one, April Dunford's book, Obviously Awesome, is another amazing positioning and messaging resource. She also has a podcast where she talks a lot about her content. That's a really, really great one. And then as far as visuals, there is a really interesting guy. His name is TJ Sheridan on LinkedIn. He talks a lot about
Sheridan?
Yeah, Sheridan. So Sheridan. He talks a lot about graphic design in the B2B landscape. And I think he's just like a really good resource to follow.
Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing this. And yeah, thank you so much for making the time for it. And especially, jumping off a call to make this one. Bet. Love hearing your stories. I love what you do. Keep delivering awesomeness. I'll keep on, following you. And please share more of those on LinkedIn. I really love this.
Yeah, thanks so much. I had such a great time. This is awesome.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Enjoy your day. Bye.
Yep, you too. Bye.